Tiger Stadium and the other ballparks that we see like it, I think, have character, and not like the cookie cutters at some of the ballparks that you see. You don't know whether you're in Atlanta or Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Des Moines or wherever. They're all designed alike. And in the older ballparks like Tiger Stadium, the fans are down close. They can see the guys sweat and hear them cuss, and they're right on top of them, and they feel like they're in the play, and it's a more intimate feeling that they have with the players in the game. And I think it's great that the old parks can still stand up.
For over 80 years, these great old walls have soaked up the cheering and the booing of fans, the heated arguments between the umpires and the managers, no-hitters, pennant-clinching victories, game-winning home runs. Oh, I'll tell you, if these walls could talk, what a story they'd tell.
The Detroit Tigers are one of the charter franchises in the newly formed American League back in 1901. They played their games in a rickety wooden affair known as Bennett Park, the same spot where Tiger Stadium sits today. But the future of baseball in Detroit was hardly secure until Ty Cobb joined the team in 1905. It was Cobb's base-stealing genius and extraordinary batting skill that drew huge crowds and firmly established baseball as a major league sport in Detroit. As the Tigers' popularity grew, owners Frank Navin and William Yawkey decided in 1911 to build a first-class ballpark for Detroit. They dismantled Bennett Park and built a steel and concrete ballpark, renaming it Navin Field. The spacious ballpark was a perfect showcase for Cobb's talents, in more ways than one. Groundskeepers kept the area in front of home plate well soaked to slow down Cobb's trademark bunts and make the fielders slip as they tried to grab them.
He'd come out with the watering cans and water, and then he'd come on, Mr. Cobb would come out and test it. And see if it was all right, and then he'd say, well, that's all right, that's enough for now. And then he'd come back a couple hours later, and Mr. Cobb, he'd test it and say, put a little more water on it. So they put more water on it. The catcher for the other team would be falling in the mud, and the other players would be coming around, and Mr. Cobb could slide in.
The quagmire soon became known as Cobb's Lake, and it's an early example of how the playing field itself could influence the outcome of a game.
Cobb was a real demon on the ball field, no question about that, and he would go in with spikes high, and he felt like the base paths belonged to him. If anybody got in the way, it was just too bad. There was a little trick that he had when he got at first base. He would kick the bag another 2 inches over towards second base. And people thought for a long time that that was just a superstition that he had. But he was trying to gain another inch or two when he was trying to steal second base. That was Ty Cobb. He was always thinking.
With the invention and mass production of the automobile, Detroit grew at an incredible rate, and so did the ballpark. In 1924, owner Frank Navin had the stands double-decked from first to third base and installed a press box on the roof. Now, this gamble paid off as the Tigers drew over 1 million fans for the first time that year. Going to a ball game at Navin Field was a real event.
The fans in the early days were completely dressed. They had coats and ties, the men had derbies, and you look at the old pictures, you very seldom see any ladies at the ball game.
Well, they had good crowds on weekend, not like they do now, but when the fences were low, they used to sit over on the roof and watch the ball game from some of the houses back there, but they're all dressed fancy. Nowadays, everybody comes in their blue jeans and whatever. But I remember in the old days, people used to be dressed up quite fancy.
In 1935, the Tigers won their first World Championship, beating the Chicago Cubs 4-2. But the joy turned to sorrow 2 weeks later when owner Navin, an avid horseman, died after falling off a horse. Walter Spike Briggs assumed control of the team and quickly went to work expanding the ballpark. With the field completely double-decked in 1938, it was renamed Briggs Stadium and ushered in a whole new era of baseball in Detroit.
He bought the team because he loved baseball. He couldn't get a ticket to a game. He really loved the game itself and wanted to be a part of that game. And he also was a hard-nosed negotiator. There were stories of him holding out when players wanted larger contracts, and he's, no, you didn't do well last year, so you're going to get actually lowering contracts. So I wouldn't say that in all cases he was a favored owner, but he respected the game.
In 1941, Briggs Stadium hosted its very first All-Star game. With the American League down 3-2 in the bottom of the ninth, A capacity crowd watched anxiously as Boston left fielder Ted Williams stepped to the plate.
Sprinter like a big bass fisherman. He goes out and he gets a 10-pounder. And that is a big thrill. He got a 10-pound bass. But you know, after you get your third and fourth and fifth and sixth, that same thrill at the same time wouldn't mean as much. That hit that I got in the All-Star game was my first regular played all the way through All-Star game. And then we won it with a home run that I hit in the ninth inning. Really, I think that's the biggest thrill I ever get in baseball.
The Tiger teams in the 1940s were among the greatest in their history. They won the pennant in 1940 and took the World Series in 1945. The team included such stalwarts as pitchers Hal Newhouser and legendary slugger Hank Greenberg.
Oh, barehanded. Hit out of one era right into another. A lot of home runs have been hit up here into the right field overhang at Tiger Stadium. It's probably the most famous home run porch in baseball. From home plate to right here, it's 310 feet.
The upper deck, when it was built, actually extends over the lower grandstand on the one side and over the street on the other side. So what you have is a very short home run porch to the upper deck in right field, and a building that actually overhangs the street behind it. And again, this was a consequence of the attempt to maximize seating capacity on a finite site. This is a very novel solution and is part of what gives Tiger Stadium its unique characteristics.
The late 40s and early 50s saw the emergence of two new superstars at Tiger Stadium, third baseman George Kell and right fielder Al Kaline.
This is important, that the people be a part of the game. I like for the people to be right on time. I like to hear the people. And at Tiger Stadium, at third base, I could hear everything that was said over there. One day, Hal Newhouser was pitching, one of the great pitchers here, and he's being rocked real good by the Boston club. And he came over to back up third base, and some fan was getting on him real good, and and I said, hey, hang in there, Hal, don't worry about that guy. And I heard the guy say, you're not doing too good yourself, Kel. So you could hear everything. I like that.
I kid everybody. I said they built Yankee Stadium for Babe Ruth to make the short right field fence, but they tore down the stadium for Al Kaline because I was getting hurt all the time. It had a very low wall right next to the foul line in right field. They were about knee high, and I'm running after a fly ball looking up, and all of a sudden I hit the wall and tumble into the stands. And they said, oh, gee, this kid won the batting title in 1955. We don't want to lose him. So they ended up taking those seats out so that I wouldn't hurt myself. And that's why they call it Kaline's Corner, because they altered the stadium to round the stands out instead of having them come straight down the foul line.
In 1960, the club changed hands again, this time to broadcasting magnate John Fetzer. Fetzer renamed the ballpark Tiger Stadium in 1961, and by the mid-60s, the Tigers were back in contention again.
'68 was a great season in Detroit because the season before the Tigers had come very close. They'd lost the pennant on the final day. We'd had the riots in Detroit that had really broken the town in two. And in '68, the town came back together rooting for the Tigers. They had a common interest, and I think it really cemented all the factions that had broken out during the riot, put them back together and made Detroit a city of harmony and peace once again.
Against the St. Louis Cardinals, we were the decisive underdogs because they had been world champions before. They had all veteran players, and of course they had great Bob Gibson. And we weren't given a great big chance of winning, but the enthusiasm of the Tiger fans, I think I remember that most, the way they came to the ballpark and trying to encourage their hometown heroes, even knowing that we didn't have much of a chance to win.
You name me any other city in America that's been through the trials and the tribulations, the unemployment problems that this city has, because this is the nature of this city. It's an industrial town, automotive town. They have layoffs, and they live and they die with automobiles. And they've had so many bad years in the last 20 with automobiles and in employment. But yet they keep flocking to Tiger Stadium, and we say, well, they won't draw as well next year. We can't. We have 20% unemployment in this city, and at times 25. But they still come to Tiger Stadium. It is, without a doubt, one of the great sports cities of America.
There are seats right behind home plate that hang over the on-deck batter's box. That's the closest seat in baseball. You can literally sit there look over the catcher's shoulder. You could take your gum out of your mouth and just flick it and hit the on-deck hitter on the head. You're practically directly over the batter's box so that you can see the player move, the hitter moving his feet in the batter's box. So you can see him changing his stance from pitch to pitch. Wonderful sense of changing speeds from the good seats in Tiger Stadium. When you see Jack Morris throw a fastball followed by a split-finger fastball going 20 miles an hour slower, you can understand that you cannot hit a good changeup. Your neurons won't allow you to. When you're timed to that faster pitch, you physically cannot change your timing. And it's the only park where I've ever felt, including all press boxes, where you're so close and so intimate that you can sense what changing speeds means.
The other day I was sitting in that ballpark and I was sitting next to some of the young Toronto Blue Jays players, and you got down in what is really an authentic dugout, as they have in Fenway Park also, and a Wrigley Field. No more of this flat stuff where you're just on flat ground like in so many multi-purpose artificial stadiums. And one of the young kids said, you know, I'm sitting in this spot right here, and with all these dents and everything and this same old padding, you think Cobb sat right in the same spot? So even a kid like that who has some historical perspective thought about that old ballpark and a real dugout, dug out of the ground, and thought about some of the ghosts that are still roaming that stadium.
There's a sense of some of the old ghosts that played here. A lot of the older ball players, you could see where they hit balls and see what they had done in their careers in these certain parks. And there's a lot of charm and individuality in some of these ballparks, whereas in some of the National League parks, they're all pretty much the same. And there's no little idiosyncrasies in the alleys or little things in the walls that you have to be careful of. There's lots of things in these ballparks as an outfielder you really have to look out for.
Being a player,
No hitters, pennant-clinching victories, game-winning home runs. Oh, I'll tell you, if these walls could talk, what a story they'd tell.
The Detroit Tigers are one of the charter franchises in the newly formed American League back in 1901. They played their games in a rickety wooden affair known as Bennett Park, the same spot where Tiger Stadium sits today.
You can see the guys sweat and hear them cuss, and they're right on top of them, and they feel like they're in the play, and it's a more intimate feeling that they have with the players in the game. And I think it's great that the old parks can still stand up.
For over 80 years, these great old walls have soaked up the cheering and the booing of fans, the heated arguments between the umpires and the managers.
Tiger Stadium and the other ballparks that we see like it, I think, have character, and not like the cookie cutters at some of the ballparks that you see. You don't know whether you're in Atlanta or Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Des Moines or wherever. They're all designed alike. And in the older ballparks like Tiger Stadium, the fans are down close.
But the future of baseball in Detroit was hardly secure until Ty Cobb joined the team in 1905. It was Cobb's base-stealing genius and extraordinary batting skill that drew huge crowds and firmly established baseball as a major league sport in Detroit. As the Tigers' popularity grew, owners Frank Navin and William Yawkey decided in 1911 to build a first-class ballpark for Detroit. They dismantled Bennett Park and built a steel and concrete ballpark, renaming it Navin Field. The spacious ballpark was a perfect showcase for Cobb's talents, in more ways than one. Groundskeepers kept the area in front of home plate well soaked to slow down Cobb's trademark bunts and make the fielders slip as they tried to grab them.
He'd come out with the watering cans and water, and then he'd come on, Mr. Cobb would come out and test it.